Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainty so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Welcome back, friends, to a brand new episode of Raising Daughters. And today I have a topic that I know every one of you listening to this is interested in. But let me ask you a couple questions to tease you. Do you ever wonder how to tell if your daughter is ready for things like smartphones or to try social media? I did a podcast on the social aspects to look for to see if your daughter's ready. Do you ever worry you're holding her back socially if you don't give in and let her have a phone or let her go on social media? Does your daughter have a high enough level of responsibility where you can trust her that she's ready to handle it? That's the topic today. How do you tell if she has a high enough level of responsibility, self-responsibility, to be able to handle all of the challenges that come with smartphones and social media? So let's talk about what you can look for. And also, on the other hand, what you can tell your daughter you're going to be looking for so she knows where she might need to do some improving. One of the most important pieces for her to show you as far as her level of responsibility is she keeping her life in balance? Does she keep things like schoolwork? Is she spending enough time with her schoolwork? That she's getting reasonable grades and putting a reasonable effort in? Does she spend enough time with her friends in person, hanging out, going out with them, having them come to the house, having sleepovers? Is she keeping in balance also time if she has a dating partner? Because a lot of girls get out of balance with that one, where they spend so much time with their dating partner and then they lose their friends. They don't spend time with their families. Has she shown you over time that she can keep her life in balance as far as time with you, with her family? Also her activities, if she's playing sports, if she's got some other activities, does she have a job? I see some girls who go to work after school and they don't get home sometimes till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, at least a couple of school nights a week. Is she having enough time to take care of herself, doing self-care? And also, does she have a variety of interests? That also, I think, is part of our life balance that keeps us healthy and grounded and balanced. So has she shown you over time that she can do that for herself? As opposed to spending all of her time in one area and not the others, she's out of balance, which oftentimes causes some of those other areas to suffer, more stress, and then sometimes that causes overwhelm and for girls to fall apart. I saw a girl about 6 months ago who came in because she was stressed out because she was out of balance, even though I don't think she was aware of that when she walked in my door. She's a cheerleader for a high school team. She also is in theater. She's in plays, oftentimes does the leads in the plays. And if any of you have a high school theater kid, you know how much time that takes for kids. And she was exhausted. Plus, she was trying to maintain good grades because she wanted to go to a good college. And her parents were on her a lot about not spending enough time with the family, which created a lot of arguments and fighting back and forth because she was out of balance. I remember one time I gave a talk. I think I may have said this story before. My phone is pinging. I'm not sure why, because the thing is off. But anyway, I was giving a talk at an all-girls high school, a private high school. And this was at the beginning of the school year, and I was talking to the freshman parents. And we were talking about some of the complaints they were having about their daughters weren't spending time. So I had them make a list on the board of the things that they wanted different with their daughters. And I actually had a mom come up and she was going to do the transcribing. So I said, who's got something they want different with their daughters? And then people were raising their hands and talking about all different kinds of things. One of the dads said his daughter was always in her room, door closed, talking to her friends. She was online. She was, going on Instagram, talking to people, blah, blah. She was scrolling walls on TikTok. And so the mom started to write that down. And I said, wait, hold on. And I said, what is your concern about her spending so much time in her room, on her devices? And he said, well, she's not in balance. She's spending so much time in her room, and she could be studying, she could be doing something else. And so the mom started to write. I said, wait, hold on. And I said, what's your concern about that? He said, well, the rest of the family is downstairs, and we're doing things together. We're playing board games together, and she's up in her room with the door closed. And so she's not down with us. So the mom started to write that on the flip chart. I said, wait, time out. Don't write yet. So I mirrored that back. Said, so it sounds like you're concerned that your daughter's in her room and she's not spending time with the family. You guys are doing things together. I said, what's your concern about that? And then this dad paused. I will never forget. And he said, I guess my concern is I miss my daughter. And I turned to the mom and I said, write that down. So I think we do miss our kids when they're out of balance. They are busy little bees today. I think many of them are too busy. I've talked about it before. And I think sometimes their lives do get out of balance. I don't think it's sometimes. I think it's often. So you can let your daughters know, I'm going to be looking to make sure that you are keeping your life in balance. And here's some things that they can show you that says that they're getting their life together and they have their life in balance. One of them is, how do they handle their sleep? Are they getting enough sleep? Do they have good sleep routines? I counsel a lot of girls who will come to my office and they're exhausted, they're stressed out, and I'll say, how much sleep do you get every night? And probably the average answer I get from a high school girl is maybe 6 hours, because they'll go to bed, quote unquote, at 10, 11 o'clock after they're done with their homework, and then they're done with their talking to their friends, all that stuff, and maybe 11 o'clock, maybe midnight, and then they have to get up at like 6 to get ready for school, because some of them try on 8 outfits and they're doing their makeup and all that. So they end up getting 5-6 hours of sleep, and that is not enough for anybody, but especially a teenager whose brains are growing and changing. They need at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So I'll ask them how much sleep they think they need in order to be able to not be so stressed, to be able to wake up in the morning, go to school, be alert at first class, be able to do their homework in the evening, do their activities. And most of them don't have a clue. And so we do some experiments. I have them think about, okay, if you're getting up at, say, 6 o'clock, let's just use that as a time. And let's just say you need 8 hours of sleep. Then that means you should be going to bed at 10. If you get up at 6:30, maybe 10:30. Not going to bed at 10 or 10:30, but falling asleep then. That's a big difference. A lot of girls I work with have a hard time falling asleep. That's a whole other podcast we can talk about. So for some of it, it's just them figuring out, well, let me try it. Let me try and go to bed at 10:30 for a while and get up at 6:30 and see if that works. They'll come back to see me in a few weeks, and then they'll tell me a lot of times that didn't make a difference. They're still exhausted. So then it might be they need more sleep, or they might need a little bit less. Everybody's a little different, but they need around 8-ish hours at least. I'd say that's a minimum. And we also know as girls and boys go through puberty, there's a lot of shifting going on in their brains. And one of the things that changes is there's a part of their brain called the pineal gland. It starts releasing melatonin increasingly later in the night. And melatonin, which our brains secrete, is awesome because it makes us drowsy. It helps us to fall asleep. But a lot of times teens are night owls because of that change. They tend to want to fall asleep later. Not they want to, but their brains want them to, and then wake up later. And of course, our culture is set up totally not that, because a lot of high schools start at 7:30, 8:30. And you wonder why these teens are not awake. Is because their brains aren't set up. Their circadian rhythm is not set up for that schedule. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So they need to figure out how much sleep that they need, and then kind of work backwards. So if I need 8 hours and I'm getting up at 6:30, I need to be at bed at 10:30. Now I need to start developing some evening habits that would be conducive to me then falling asleep at 10:30. So then we talk about how they can do that. They can figure out the kinds of things like making sure that the room is dark, making sure the room is cool enough, maybe having a sound machine, making sure there is no devices in the room, i.e. phones, tablets, anything that can ping or buzz or beep, including a TV. Because if those things are in their rooms, it's so hard for them and us to not want to check them. And if you check it, then you wake up, all of a sudden, it may take you another 20 or 30 minutes to get back to sleep. And there's all that research about how the blue lights from screens makes it harder for us to fall asleep because the lights tell us, oh, it's daylight, wake up. And because it suppresses melatonin production. I educate girls about that. Most of them have not heard that before, which makes it harder for them to fall asleep. So most people need 30 minutes, maybe even an hour after the lights go out, after the screens go out, for their brain to make enough melatonin to cause them to feel drowsy enough to fall asleep. So that is part of the sleep routine. Also, they may need to empty their heads because they have so many thoughts, so much stuff going on in their heads. I have so many patients I see who have such busy brains. That's true, I think, oftentimes because they're not taking the time during the day to express things. Things build up, things like thoughts, anxieties, feelings, emotions, all kinds of things build up that they don't want to deal with. They just get busy from them. They get distracted from them. And then at 10 o'clock at night, when they lay down their beds and they turn off the lights to fall asleep, everything they've been shoving down all day comes bubbling up, and then it's hard for them to turn it off. I bet a lot of parents listening to this podcast at this very moment would say, that's true for me too. So they might need some time where they journal those thoughts out in that last 20, 30 minutes before bed, or do some drawing or do some coloring, do something to sort of unleash not unleash, but unload their brain. Are they exercising regularly? Because if they're not, then it's hard to fall asleep. Do they have a routine where they go to bed about the same time every night? That helps a lot. So you can talk to them. They need some education about how do you develop a good bedtime, falling asleep routine. And that includes not having that phone and electronics in their room. I would make sure there's a docking station in their parents' bedroom or down in the family room, somewhere where they can't see it and get teased by it, if you will. So if they can learn to develop a good sleep routine and they're getting enough sleep, that helps a lot for you to be able to say, okay, they've got their life and they're starting to get their life in more balance. I see a lot of teen girls, by the way, especially in high school, who have a hard time falling asleep because they're so worried about a friend. And if their phone is in the room, what happens is at 10, 10:30, 11, 12 o'clock is that a friend calls and they're depressed and they're going through a rough time. Sometimes they have suicidal ideations, suicidal thoughts. And this friend who is listening to them and wants to help. And so she can't not talk to them because if I don't, then they may do something to harm themselves. And so I've seen girls staying up until 1, 2, 3 o'clock at night because they're so worried about their friends. And they're being a good friend in some ways, but in other ways, they're not. I've never met a teenage girl who is a certified therapist, who has the training and the ability to really help a friend who is that depressed or who has suicidal ideations. They need to pass it on to their friends' parents, a school counselor. Someone needs to give that girl some help, which is not them at 2 o'clock every morning, trying to counsel them so that they don't hurt themselves. I see a lot of girls who have a hard time with their sleep because of that. So they need to set boundaries and take care of themselves. So one way that girls can show you that they have a level of responsibility is making sure that they get enough sleep and have developed some good sleep routines. Because I know, and you probably know from watching your daughters, if they're not getting enough sleep and they're sleep deprived, everything falls apart from there. Their focus, they're crabbier, they're moodier, they get triggered more easily. Nothing does better. Everything does worse when they're not getting enough sleep. You also can look for levels of responsibility in how they've handled previous levels of any kind of technology, like getting away from the TV. If they're watching YouTube videos, they have the ability to know that if the screens are supposed to go off at 10 o'clock, then at 10 o'clock, the screens go off. Video games are also a big one. I think boys tend to do more video games than girls, but girls do as well. And I see some girls who say, well, I want to get off, but I'm halfway through this level, and they have all these reasons why they just can't turn off that video game when they're supposed to. They've made an agreement with their parents that the video games go off at, let's say, 10 o'clock, and at 10:30, the parent walks in their daughter's room. Number one, shouldn't be in their room. But number two, they'll say, what do you know, the agreement is 10 o'clock, and the girls would go off this whole thing about levels, and I can't stop now because, and what they're showing their parents, if that keeps happening, is I don't have the level of maturity and impulse control and responsibility to handle even this level of technology. So I will definitely not have that ability with something which is even more intense, like a phone or social media. So whether it's video games, watching YouTube videos, TV, having their pads, maybe a smartphone, they need to show their parents that they have the ability to follow through with the agreements and turn it off when they have agreed with their parents that it needs to go off. So their ability to handle their previous levels of technology will educate their parents, are you ready for the next thing, which might be a smartphone or social media? Do they have good impulse control? Where they're not showing you addictive behaviors, if you will. This is sort of a tough one because most teenagers have a higher level of lack of impulse control, and they have some what look like addictive behaviors because of what's happening in their brain. So let me step aside for a minute here and talk for a moment just about what's going on in their brains that makes it hard for them to control their impulses. So, the teen brain is not fully formed. It's undergoing a lot of pruning, a lot of changing, a lot of more neurons are being created. There's more connections happening. What's interesting is that a lot of times today, especially, our girls are starting through puberty earlier. The average age now is around 10 and a half, 11. So by the time they're 12, 13, 14, they look like what would typically be more like an 18-year-old. They look older than their age. But a lot of times we end up treating them as if they're older because they look older, instead of what I think is more appropriate, which is treat them more like their chronological age, not their apparent age or what their appearance might fool you into thinking, because their brains are not mature yet. For the average girl, the prefrontal cortex in their brain, their executive center part of their brain, isn't fully mature until late teens, 18, 20, early 20s. For boys, add another 5 years at least, mid 20s. So their ability to control their impulses, think before they act, all that is not in place yet. That part of their brain is not matured enough. Also remember that, or maybe don't remember, it's important to know that the teenage baseline level of dopamine is lower. They tend to be a little bit more bored, a little more numb, takes a little bit more to get them excited. But once they get stimulated, their release of dopamine is higher than adults. And then the receptors in their brain are more sensitive to that. So that enhanced dopamine release, increases the reward drive in their brain. They get a bigger high, a bigger thrill from things, which causes them to gravitate towards things like thrills, risky behaviors. If you want to know why teens oftentimes do dumb things, a lot of times that's the answer. It's because their brain gets a higher reward. They get more dopamine than our brain does. And this increases when they're with their peers, or when they think other people might be watching them, which is hard today, which is because people are always having their phones out. They're always recording things. And so we're constantly entertaining people with our behaviors, which makes it even harder for teens to control those impulses, because those things are going to end up on social media. And because they think that's going to be on social media, then oftentimes they end up doing things that they know they shouldn't because it's just too hard not to. So there's an increased susceptibility to addictions and impulsivity in our teenagers, which is also why teens who start smoking or start doing drugs when in their teen years are much more likely to become addicted than somebody starting when they're 25 or 30 because of their brains being so vulnerable. They did lots of experiments in the past when they were looking for what they used to call the pleasure center of the brain. And what they found was there was a different part of the brain that they labeled the reward system. The reward system part of the brain is our brain's most primitive motivational system. It evolved to propel people to take action. It helped to propel people to consume. Because when the brain recognized an opportunity for reward, it released dopamine, which told their brains what to pay attention to. Dopamine creates feelings of arousal. You're more alert, you're more awake, you're captivated. We recognize the possibility of feeling good, and we're willing to work to get that feeling. That's what the reward system in our brain does. It doesn't make you feel happy and content when that part of the brain gets stimulated and you get that dopamine. It creates more of a seeking. more of a craving, a desire, anticipation. We're not satisfied. It's not pleasure yet. It's just the desire to want that. It's a promise of reward to keep us hunting and gathering and working and wooing. And that was put in our brains because it helped us survive. Because if you were walking around foraging, which is what we used to do thousands and thousands of years ago, there may not be food all the time. So if you saw some game, if you saw a bushel of blackberries, our brain learned to say, eat those now. We would get a shot of dopamine in our reward center, and the brain said, you need that, you want that, and it wanted us to eat those now because there may not be blackberries tomorrow. May not be game tomorrow. We need to do it now. And when the reward system in our brain sends dopamine, and we start getting that craving and stuff, it also sends a message to our brain's stress centers, which triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol, which makes us feel anxious as we anticipate that desired thing. And that need to get what we want isn't just, I would like blackberries. It's like, I need blackberries. It feels like a life and death emergency. It's a matter of my survival to eat that piece of chocolate cake or to answer my phone. That's what it did. The initial reward back in the day, 50, 100,000 years ago, was food. It's not that so much today. I mean, it can become that, but there's so many more things that we become attracted to today, which is why when girls show up at my weekend retreats and my summer camps, and they're checking in at the check-in table with their parents, one of the first questions someone asks them is, where's your phone? And they'll pull it out, or they'll say, I gave it to my mom. And I'll say, Mom, Dad, do you have their phone? And they'll say yes. And a lot of times girls will they get this anxious thing that goes on. They're like, well, I need that phone because I need to fall asleep. I need to check with my friends. I have a friend who's depressed, or I use it for my alarm clock, or I need to play music. If they get frantic, that's because of that reward system. And the stress hormones start to peak again in their brain, and they want it. They're afraid that they're going to need it. So their brains are set up to be stressed and to be more impulsive and to be more addicted. And they end up craving things like phones and social media when they get a taste of it. And they're convinced that the only thing that's going to make them feel better is that object that the dopamine is pointing them towards. So then when you think about technology, you think about video games, you think about phones, you think about social media, it becomes the anticipation of new messages, photos, videos that makes us laugh and makes us feel better. That's what causes us to keep hitting that refresh button or the search button. The promise of reward. That's why they call it a search engine, because like rats hitting a little lever in those experiments, it's us pushing the levers on our video games. It's us looking at the next wall. It's the next scrolling. And, we want that shot of dopamine. Our brains want that shot of dopamine. I've read, I don't play video games, never have, but I've read research that shows that video games have been made easier today because they want them to be more likely for kids to not give up. They want them to stay playing. And the promise of the next level or the next big win is what keeps the dopamine firing, which keeps them wanting to do more. And it's hard to pull away from it. It's the unpredictability of the scoring and advancing that keeps the dopamine neurons firing. And it becomes as addictive as drugs. It's the same place in our brain that cocaine causes the same kind of issue with dopamine. Same part of the brain, that reward system in our brain. What all of us need in those situations is for our brain to kick in and our brain to be able to say, the prefrontal cortex to say, hey, look, I know it's time to turn that off, or I know I shouldn't eat that piece of chocolate cake, or I know I need to put my phone away. But what we want to have happen is for the longer term thinking part of our brain to kick in. So what helps is for that thing that our brain is saying we need right now, and we need it to survive, we need that to be out of sight and out of mind. So if that phone is not in your daughter's bedroom, it's in your room, and they don't see it and hear the buzzing and stuff, what happens is that immediate reward system kind of calms down. The immediate gratification system calms down. And our brain starts to treat it like more of a future reward. And when that happens, our brain can focus on the longer term outlook, which says that, do I really need to be up all night? No. Do I really need that piece of chocolate cake? Do I really need whatever? and that future thinking part of the brain can kick in, and it's more reasonable and can tell us, don't give in to that impulse. If it's right in front of you, short-term gratification reward system kicks in, and then it's really, really hard not to give in, especially with an immature brain. So that out of sight, out of mind thing is one of the reasons why people like me and others often always encourage parents to not allow their teens to have those phones and any kind of technology in their rooms. It's just too hard. It's just too hard to not look at it. So that's one of the reasons why their brains are not really wired to take care of themselves with things like technology and social media, because of that reward system, and because of their increased susceptibility to addictions and impulsivity. And it's hard for them to have that kind of control. They have to show you that over time, and their brain needs to mature. Other things we need to look for as far as, are they responsible enough to be able to handle things? One of them is, how good have they been as far as following through with agreements? If you sit down and make an agreement with them and talk about accountability, do they follow through with agreements? If the agreement is to get off their iPad at 10 o'clock, and then every night they're on their iPad at 10:30, 11 o'clock, what they're showing their parents is, I don't have the ability to follow through with my agreements. I don't have the maturity yet. If it ends up in power struggles, if they end up rebelling and sneaking and lying, it doesn't mean they're an evil person. It just means they're not ready. That's all. They're just not ready for that level of technology, that level of impulse control. The other thing that's interesting is I see so many teens. I had a girl in my office several months ago, and she came in with her mom because they were having these knockdown, drag-out fights and arguments and things about. And a lot of it was about this girl who wasn't following through with her agreements. And so they would get in an argument. The girl would get mad, and she'd say, all my friends have this or that. And then she would stomp out of the room, screaming at her mom, I hate you. She would stomp up the steps. She'd go into her room, slam the door. And in that moment, she got a very short-lived, momentary feeling of being powerful, like standing up for herself and screaming and yelling, getting in her mom's face. That gave her a sense of control and power for a short little period of time. But what I ask girls in the office is, what did you teach your mom when you did that? And the answer to that is, I taught her that I'm immature. I taught her that I'm out of control, and therefore I need more management. I need to be more micromanaged. I need more restrictions. I don't want them to be micromanaged, but you get my point. The last thing a teen girl wants is to be micromanaged, or for her parents to think that she's immature and out of control. What she really needs is to be able and willing to sit down with her mom and dad and talk through agreements and listen. I teach girls all the time in my office to listen to their parents, to mirror them back. So it sounds like you don't want me dating because of whatever. And if a parent says, yes, that's my concern, then I teach the girls to keep going and say, I don't understand. What's your concern about that? And then let the parents share more about what they're concerned about. And then for the girl to mirror that back until they feel like their parent has been fully heard and they get to what their real issue is. A lot of times it's scared because they're afraid that their daughter is going to become sexually active. They're afraid they have a family history of addictions. They're afraid their daughter is going to, if they go to these parties, that they're going to end up smoking weed and get addicted. There's some issue that's usually deeper than the initial on top. Like that example I showed you about the dad who was saying, my daughter's always up in a room. The real issue was, I miss her. So if the daughter can learn to mirror her mom or dad, get down to what the real issue is, oftentimes she can then offer some solutions. Well, how about this? If I can show you A and B and C, then would you be okay with me doing it? If I meet your concern in some way, then would you be more willing to let me try whatever it is? That's a very mature way to handle when you feel like you're not getting what you want or what you need. To listen, hear the other person's concerns, try to meet them in a very calm way. Then you're teaching your parent something different. You're teaching your parent, wow, my daughter's growing up. She's taking us seriously. So if they can learn to mirror, listen to concerns, and then meet them, that's how they'll get more of what they want, including what might be a phone or social media. Is their daughter showing their parents that they're making good choices, making good decisions about things? No teenager is perfect with their choices and decisions, but if they have a pretty good track record of being thoughtful, thinking things through, maybe even bouncing things off of their parents sometimes if they're not sure, using quiet time to access their intuition. We always want our daughters to trust their gut, trust their intuition when it comes to making decisions. Well, in order to do that, you need to be able to get quiet and access your intuition and your gut. Do they have that ability? Are they showing you that? Maybe they need some education about that. So I think them having a history of making pretty good decisions most of the time is important. Can they also make decisions that are different than their friends sometimes? That's also an important way of showing your parents that you have a level of responsibility. I had a girl at one of my retreats years ago. Her name was, I always use different names, but I'll say her name was Kat. And she was in 8th grade, and she came in, I'd seen her once in the office. Then she came to one of our retreats, and then she was talking on the retreat about how she was upset and sad because she was pulling away from her friends. Her friend group that she had had for 3 or 4 years was starting to get more racy. She said that they were, a couple of them had tried weed several times. Some of them had become sexually active with boys. They were just becoming, in her mind, more wild, and she wasn't ready for that. She didn't agree with it. It didn't mesh with her values. And so she was struggling with it. So we heard her out. In my office, I heard her out as well. And we talked to her about what was important to her. And so what she came to was that she wasn't ready for it, and her values were important to her. So she told her friends she wasn't comfortable with it. And what ended up happening was she started to spend time away from them, which meant for a little while she was alone. She was in between groups, if you will, which is a really hard place for a preteen, teen girl to be. Took her a little while to find some more people to hang out with, and that's a tough place to be, sitting alone at lunch, eating lunch in the library, eating lunch in the office or whatever, or sometimes in classrooms. But this girl had the guts, and she had the maturity to go through that process and to find some friends who better matched her values. If your daughter can show you that she's had experiences like that, that would be a huge deposit into your account of, wow, my daughter is becoming more mature and responsible and trustworthy. Also, do they learn from their mistakes? If they make a mistake, it's not enough to say, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. I always encourage parents to go through a process of asking girls about the whole process of how they or why they made the mistake. I saw a girl in my office a few months ago who got caught stealing some clothes from a store, and her parents flipped out, got angry, grounded her, took away her phone, all this stuff, did a lot of punishment, but they didn't help her figure out why she made the mistake. So in my counseling practice in my office, I helped her go through the process of, she remembered being in the store, and she saw some really cute outfits that she really wanted. They were similar to what some of her friends were wearing, and she couldn't afford it. And so I had her remember in that moment in the store when she was looking at those things and she knew she shouldn't be taking them. Does she remember that an alarm went off inside of her? An alarm that we all have, our conscience, that says, you sure you want to do that? Is that really the right thing? Do you really want to make that decision, if you will? All of us have an alarm like that goes off. So this girl, Natalia, said, yes, she remembered that alarm going off. And I said, well, how do you experience it in your body? For her, it was two things, a pounding in her chest and a tightening of her chest. For other kids, it's a tightening in their throat, a funny feeling in their stomach, a lot of thoughts in their brain. They start to sweat. There's a physical reaction that says, I'm at a decision point, and my gut is saying you might want to step back and pause and think about this. In that moment, Natalia felt that in her body, and she ignored it. So then the next key question is, why do you think you ignored the alarm in that moment? And what Natalia realized after we talked for a little while was she always felt kind of different from her friends and a little bit left out, a little bit on the outside. Her friends, most of her friends came from pretty affluent families, and she did not. It was a private school that she went to, and she was on a scholarship. And her friends, when she would go to their homes, they had nice homes, and she lived in an apartment, which is fine, but she felt different, like less than, like I don't quite fit the mold here. And she wanted to be included. She wanted to be able to, for her friends to call her and all that. And so when the alarm went, you really shouldn't be stealing these clothes, she ignored it because she really wanted to fit into this group better. She wanted to be able to dress in some of those clothes and feel like them, if you will. That's why she made her mistake. And then the last question in that process is, so what will be different? Because you're still going to live in an apartment. You're still not going to have as much money as your friends. So what are you going to do about that? So then we talked through some solutions to that for her. So that the next time that alarm goes off, hopefully she'll recognize the alarm. She'll step back from herself and say, what do I want to do here? Is this really worth it? So if your daughters can show you that they can go through that kind of a process and learn from their mistakes, that's a huge, to me, sign that they're developing the maturity and the sense of responsibility to make better choices, because they're going to make a lot of choices on their phones and on social media. A couple more things that you can look for as far as are they becoming responsible enough. One of them is, do they have a good track record as far as handling their boredom? Because a lot of girls spend way too much time on their phones and on their social media because they're bored. And so they pick it up and they start scrolling, and then hours go by. Literally hours go by. I've read surveys and research that says that the average teen girl spends about 7-8 hours a day on devices of some kind. And the girls I've talked to and girls in my retreats, when they actually check, when they go home or if they're in the office, I'll have them look at their phone and say, well, check. They'll say, I spend like 4 hours a day. It's not that much. And I'll say, great, pull out your phone. I'm giving you permission in the office to pull out your phone. And I want you to check back on your history to see exactly how many hours. And I've never had a girl who didn't have at least 6 to 8 hours of time on their devices. And they're like, oh, oops. So anyway, are they doing a good job of handling their boredom with things, with a variety of things? Like, are they reading? Do they do art? Are they listening to music or making music or playing an instrument, spending time with their younger siblings, spending time with their family, doing things that are productive? I had a girl in my counseling practice recently who was handling her boredom by creating her own business, selling jewelry that she made. She was very creative. She was thinking about going into fashion for college. So she was doing that instead of scrolling walls for 7 or 8 hours a day. So if they have a good track record of handling their boredom by doing things that are more, in my mind, more productive than just scrolling walls, that's a good sign that they're growing up, maturing, and increasing their level of responsibility. And then last but not least, are they transparent enough with you, mom and dad? Meaning, do they share enough with you where you feel like you're connected to them? Like you have a good connection, you understand them, and you have a pretty good idea about how they think about things, because they've been willing to have some open, honest conversations about drug use, drinking, sexuality, their futures, the behaviors online that they see that their friends do sometimes. I think it's good to go on some of those sites before your daughters are allowed on them on their own to say, show me some of the posts that your friends are making. Are they appropriate? Are they not? Why are they not? How would you handle that conversation if they see that there's a lot of drama? They see that their friends are arguing online or having some drama online. Are they willing to have those kinds of conversations so that they can show their parents or tell their parents, this is how I think about that and why? Which is a much deeper conversation than, no, I don't drink. No, I wouldn't do pot. I want to know why. What are your reasons why? Have you been thinking it through, and what are your thoughts about that? So if they have at least a reasonable level of transparency where parents feel like I understand my daughter's way of thinking. She's not just some, airhead out there going, I don't know, and just doing whatever their friends do. She's actually being thoughtful about things. I don't think that girls need to tell their parents every deep, dark secret that they have, but just enough so their parents hear about how they're thinking things through. Maybe even showing examples about how they're thinking different than their peers, like I had mentioned earlier. A good time to do these kinds of conversations, by the way, or when you're sitting down, which I hope you do, and watching TV shows with them, watching movies, and then maybe pausing sometimes and saying, you see a behavior that maybe there's a teen on the movie, or the TV show. You can say, why do you think she would think that way? Or why do you think she may have acted that way? She made a mistake. Why do you think she gave in? And then that's a way to kind of prompt your daughter to be thinking about why. Another way to kind of get into their head and their hearts to get a sense of where they at with these issues. So overall, one of the things to keep in mind is my daughter ready for social media. in any way, today we're talking about their level of self-responsibility, is have they earned the privilege of the next level of technology, i.e. a smartphone or social media, with mature, responsible behavior over time. Not mature, responsible behavior for 3 days or a week, but over weeks and months. And what you've done then is you put the ball in their court. You've let them know that as soon as I see this behavior is A, B, and C over time, then I'll know you're ready for D. I'll know you're ready for the next thing. Here's what we need to see from you that will tell us that you're ready for a phone or for social media. Give them a blueprint. Be specific. Don't say be mature, because that's like, what does that mean? I would lay out things like I've laid out with you here today in this podcast and the previous podcast on levels of social readiness. Lay out a blueprint that lets them know when I see a lot of these behaviors over time, not that you have to be perfect, but I see that you're, for the most part, are showing these, then you'll show us that you're ready to at least try that next level. And I think that's a good blueprint for you, moms and dads, to know, is she ready? It's not about an age. It's not about a grade. It's not about all of her friends have social media. It's about, is she ready? And has she shown me those signs over time? Lay it out for them. Be specific so the ball's in their court then. It gives them a level of being responsible for, I can make this happen if I really want it. Having said all of that, I said this at the end of that last podcast. And by the way, I'll put the link to that in my show notes if you didn't get a chance to hear the social readiness signs for, is my daughter ready for a phone or social media? I don't think most girls are ready for social media till at least mid-high school, age, 15, 16, 17, with a good track record, as I've outlined today and in the previous podcast. And sometimes girls are pretty mature, but they're in a pond swimming where most of the people around them are not showing that level of maturity. The other thing is, are they picking friends who are mature and responsible? Because if you're around friends who are mature and responsible, then the mirror neurons in their brains are going to say, wow, okay, I'm seeing how they're behaving, so I will tend to imitate that. They also imitate the other direction. If people are smoking weed or smoking cigarettes or doing naughty things, they're more likely to do naughty things because the mirror neurons in their brain says, this is what I'm supposed to be doing if I want to have connections. So I think sometime in their mid-teen years, middle high school, I should say. But again, only with a good track record of showing you that behavior over time that we've talked about today. I hope this helps. It's a complicated issue, but I would say simplify it. They're either ready or they're not. And they've either shown that they're ready or they haven't. And I think if they've been given the blueprint and they've been unable to meet those standards, if you will, then I think they're just showing you they're not ready. That's all. They're just not mature enough. And everybody's mature at a different age. And some kids might be ready earlier when they're 14 or 15. Some kids maybe when they're later. I want them to have some of those devices. I see that they're valuable in a lot of ways, but I also think there's a level of responsibility that needs to be in your daughters to let them to be able to handle them and get the value without the costs. Great podcast to listen to with your daughter. Stimulate discussions. Make some agreements together. Pass this on to your friends who have teens who are asking you questions like, you think our daughters are ready? This might give them information as well. Check out my show notes on the website at www.drtimjordan.com. In the show notes, by the way, it'll have that link to that previous podcast. I appreciate you passing these on. I appreciate you sending me feedback too. Send it to my wife, Anne, at drtimjordan.com. That's Anne, ANNE, at drtimjordan.com. Send me feedback. Send me questions or ideas you have for future podcasts. Also, I am revising a book that I published 20 years ago. The book is entitled Keeping Your Family Grounded When You're Flying by the Seat of Your Pants. It needed an update. I added 4 new chapters. One of them is on social media. One of them is on listening. One of them is on how we've gotten away from our play-based childhood and the cost to our kids because of that. One of them is on beginning with the end in mind. So there's 4 brand new chapters, and I revised all the other chapters. So it's almost like a brand new book. So look for that also. It'll be coming out probably in about 1 to 2 months. So I'll be putting stuff on my website that lets you know when it's out. I appreciate you stopping by every week. I'll be back here with a brand new podcast in a week. I'll see you then.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.